My phone rang at 2:02 in the morning. At my age, late-night calls only bring bad news. That's why I was already awake when the screen lit up with a familiar name. Ethan, my nephew. For a moment, I considered letting it ring. But something in my chest told me this wasn't an ordinary call. The second I answered, I heard panic. Not words, not sentences. Just the sound of a grown man trying to breathe through fear. "Uncle, please, what did you do?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I placed the phone on the kitchen table, took a sip of the water I'd been holding for the past hour, and listened to him struggle for air. For the first time in his life, Ethan sounded exactly the way I had felt for the last 3 weeks. Lost, terrified, betrayed, and somehow, after everything he'd done, he still believed he was a victim. But to explain why my nephew was calling me in the middle of the night, I need to take you back to the day I learned that my life savings had almost disappeared. Before we continue, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And if you enjoy true family stories with unexpected twists, don't forget to subscribe. My name is Daniel Harper. I'm 65 years old, and for nearly 4 decades, I worked as a structural engineer in northern Illinois. I designed bridges, not the kind people take pictures of, the kind people cross every day without noticing. That's how I liked it. If nobody noticed your bridge, it meant you'd done your job right. 3 years before that phone call, I retired. 2 months earlier, I had buried my wife, Margaret. She died suddenly from a stroke while watering the flowers behind our farmhouse. 1 minute, she was talking about repainting the porch. The next, she was gone. 36 years of marriage ended on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. People tell you grief gets easier with time. What they don't tell you is that silence gets louder. Every room in our farmhouse carried her memory. Her reading glasses still sat beside the recliner. Her favorite coffee mug remained in the cabinet, exactly where she'd left it. Sometimes, I caught myself turning to tell her something before remembering she wasn't there anymore. Margaret and I had been careful with money our entire lives. We skipped expensive vacations. We drove used cars. We saved every extra dollar we could. By the time I retired, we'd built a modest nest egg, enough to live comfortably, fix up the farmhouse, and maybe buy a small place near the lake she'd always dreamed about. We never wanted luxury, just peace. I didn't have children of my own. My younger sister, Linda, had 2 sons. Ethan, the youngest, was always a charming one. Tall, confident, quick with a joke. He had the kind of smile that made people trust him instantly, especially me. When Margaret got sick, Ethan showed up before anyone else. He brought meals. He drove me to doctor appointments. He sat beside me at the hospital during those long nights when every machine beep felt like a countdown. After Margaret passed away, he visited almost every weekend. He helped me sort through her clothes when I couldn't bring myself to open the closet. He fixed things around the house. Sometimes, he'd stay late just to make sure I wasn't eating dinner alone. One evening, while we sat on the porch watching the sunset, I broke down. For the first time in my life, I cried in front of someone. Ethan put his hand on my shoulder and said quietly, "You've always been there for me, Uncle Dan. Now it's my turn." I believed him. Looking back now, I realize trust isn't destroyed all at once. It's built slowly, one kind gesture, one helpful favor, one comforting word at a time, just like a bridge, layer by layer. And if you don't inspect the foundation carefully enough, you never see the cracks until it's too late. 8 months after Margaret passed away, I started having trouble managing my finances online. The bank kept changing passwords and security settings. I forgot login codes. I missed 2 property tax payments without realizing it. The final warning letter arrived on a cold November afternoon. I stared at it for nearly an hour, feeling older than I ever had before. That weekend, Ethan came by for dinner. As we drank coffee at the kitchen table, I told him everything. I told him how overwhelmed I felt, how embarrassed I was, how I worried that I was losing my ability to keep up with things. He listened carefully. Then he leaned forward and said 5 words that changed my life forever. "Let me handle everything, Uncle." At the time, it sounded like kindness. I had no idea it was the beginning of something much darker. The following Tuesday, Ethan drove me to the bank. I remember the weather clearly. Gray skies, cold wind, the kind of day where everything feels heavier than usual. During the drive, Ethan kept reassuring me, "Uncle Dan, you shouldn't have to worry about bills and passwords anymore. You've worked hard your entire life. It's time for you to relax." Every word sounded reasonable. After all, he wasn't asking for money. He was offering help. At least, that's what I believed. Inside the bank, a young employee explained the options available to us. "There are different levels of account access," she said politely. "You can set up limited permissions or a financial power of attorney." Before I could answer, Ethan smiled. "He's family," he said. "I'm only helping him pay bills and keep track of things." The employee looked at me. "Mr. Harper, are you sure you want to give full access to all your accounts?" For just a second, I hesitated. Not because I didn't trust Ethan, because admitting I needed help felt like admitting I had become old. And nobody wants to admit that, especially someone who spent nearly 40 years solving complicated engineering problems. I laughed awkwardly. "It's fine," I said. "He's my nephew." I signed every document they placed in front of me: checking account, savings account, retirement fund, investment account, one signature after another, each one giving Ethan more control over my future. As we walked back to the parking lot, he wrapped an arm around my shoulder. "You did the right thing, Uncle Dan." I nodded. At the time, I believed that too. For the next 6 months, everything seemed perfect. My bills were paid on time. The property taxes were handled. Automatic payments were set up for utilities. When the furnace stopped working during winter, Ethan arranged a repair before I even had time to worry about it. Every Sunday evening, he called to check on me. Sometimes we talked for 10 minutes, sometimes an hour. He'd ask about my health, remind me to take my medication, and tell me funny stories about work. Looking back now, I understand something I couldn't see then. Trust isn't stolen in one day. It's earned carefully, patiently. People who deceive you rarely start by hurting you. They start by helping you. That spring, Ethan surprised me with tickets to a local baseball game. We spent the afternoon laughing like we used to when he was a kid. At one point, he looked over and said, "Aunt Margaret would have loved today." I smiled. For the first time since losing my wife, I felt something close to normal again. That's what made what happened next hurt even more, because betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the people you would never think to question. A few weeks later, I received my monthly bank statement in the mail. I glanced at it briefly before placing it in the kitchen drawer with the others. I trusted Ethan. There was no reason to check. At least, that's what I told myself. Month after month, the statements piled up, unopened, ignored. Meanwhile, Ethan's life seemed to improve overnight. He started posting more photos online, expensive restaurants, weekend trips, designer clothes, a luxury SUV. When I asked about it, he laughed. "Business is finally taking off," he said. I was proud of him. Proud. That's the word that still bothers me. Because while I was feeling proud, he was quietly building a life with money that didn't belong to him. The signs were there. I just didn't want to see them. Maybe grief makes you trust people more. Maybe loneliness does. Or maybe when someone spends months proving they're dependable, you stop asking questions. Either way, I never looked beneath the surface. Engineers are trained to inspect structures for hidden weaknesses. But somehow, I forgot to inspect the people I loved. Before we go any further, tell me in the comments, have you ever trusted someone who completely surprised you? And if you're enjoying this story, subscribe so you don't miss more powerful family stories like this. 3 months later, my old friend Richard called from Florida. He'd been inviting me to visit ever since Margaret passed away. I always found excuses. But this time, Ethan insisted, "You need a break. Uncle Dan, I'll watch the house. I'll take care of everything." I almost said no. Something in my gut felt uncertain. Not fear, just hesitation. But after months of seeing how responsible Ethan had been, I pushed that feeling aside. That decision changed everything. because while I was sitting on a beach hundreds of miles away, my phone was about to receive a message that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my family. Florida was never my idea. Margaret used to joke that I packed for vacations like a man being forced into exile. Even after retirement, I preferred routine over adventure. But my old friend Richard had been inviting me to visit him near Sarasota for almost 2 years. After losing Margaret, I'd turned him down every single time. This time, Ethan wouldn't let me make another excuse. "You need this, Uncle Dan," he said as he helped load my suitcase into the car. "Go sit by the ocean. Eat good food. Clear your head." "What about the house?" I asked. "I'll check on it every few days." "The mail? I'll bring it inside." "The cat?" He smiled. "I've got everything covered." Standing in my driveway that morning, I remember feeling grateful. Grateful that I wasn't facing the rest of my life alone. I shook Ethan's hand before leaving, but he pulled me into a hug instead. "Try to enjoy yourself," he said. For the first time in months, I believed I actually could, and for a while I did. Richard's place overlooked a quiet stretch of water lined with palm trees. We spent our mornings drinking coffee on the patio and our afternoons walking along the beach. The ocean had a way of silencing thoughts I'd been carrying since Margaret died. For 10 days, I slept better than I had in years. For 10 days, I stopped thinking about paperwork, bills, and empty rooms. For 10 days, I allowed myself to believe life could still be good. Then, on the 11th morning, my phone buzzed. I almost ignored it. It was a text message from the management company that handled the small rental cottage Margaret and I had purchased years earlier. The message was short. "Mr. Harper, we attempted to deposit this month's rent, but the account on file has been closed. Please contact us as soon as possible." I read it twice, then a third time. Close? That account had been active for over 20 years. There had to be some mistake. I called the property manager immediately. "Hi, Susan. I just got your message." Her voice sounded confused. "We tried depositing the rent yesterday, but the payment bounced back. The bank says the account no longer exists." "That's impossible," I said. "I never closed it." There was a brief silence. According to the bank, it was closed a little over 2 weeks ago by an authorized signer. My stomach tightened. Authorized signer. Only 2 people had access to that account. Me and Ethan. I thanked Susan, ended the call, and stared at the ocean outside Richard's window. The waves kept rolling toward the shore as if nothing had happened, as if my world hadn't just tilted sideways. I called the bank. After answering a series of security questions, the representative confirmed what Susan had told me. The account had been closed 17 days earlier. The remaining balance had been transferred into another account, an account I didn't recognize. "Who authorized the transfer?" I asked quietly. There was a pause. "An approved account signer, Mr. Harper." I knew exactly what that meant. Still, my mind refused to accept it. There had to be another explanation. A misunderstanding. A banking error. Anything else. I thanked the representative and ended the call. Richard found me sitting motionless on the patio 20 minutes later. "You okay?" he asked. I opened my mouth to answer, but nothing came out, because deep down, a terrible thought had already begun forming. What if this wasn't a mistake? What if the person I trusted most had been lying to me all along? I called my accountant, Rachel Bennett. She'd managed my taxes for years and knew every detail of my finances. "Rachel," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I need you to review every account I have. Everything. Everything." She could hear something in my voice because she didn't ask questions. "Give me a few hours," she said. The weight was unbearable. I walked the beach with Richard, but I couldn't focus. I couldn't eat lunch. I checked my phone every few minutes. At exactly 4:37 that afternoon, Rachel called back. The moment I heard her voice, I knew. "Daniel," she said softly, "where are you right now?" "Florida." There was a long silence. Then she spoke the words that changed my life forever. "Almost all of your money is gone." I sat down so quickly that the chair behind me nearly tipped over. "What do you mean, gone?" Rachel took a deep breath. "There have been withdrawals from your retirement account. Transfers from your savings, and your investment portfolio was liquidated months ago. How much? Another pause. Over $200,000. The phone nearly slipped from my hand. No, I whispered. That can't be right. I'm looking at the records right now, she said. Every transaction was approved by someone with full access to your accounts. I already knew the answer before I asked the question. Who? Rachel hesitated. Then she said the name I was desperately hoping not to hear. Ethan. The world around me suddenly felt distant. The sound of the waves. The seagulls overhead. Richard speaking somewhere behind me. Everything faded, because in that moment, I realized something far worse than losing money. I had lost trust. And once trust breaks, nothing ever fits back together the same way. I ended the call and sat in silence for a long time. Then I made a decision. I wasn't going to call Ethan. Not yet, because after 38 years of building bridges, I'd learned one important lesson. When you discover a crack in the foundation, you don't panic. You inspect it. You measure it. And then you figure out exactly how deep it goes. I booked the first flight home the next morning. Richard drove me to the airport before sunrise. Neither of us spoke much during the ride. He could tell something had broken inside me, and he respected me enough not to force words out of me before I was ready. As I sat on the plane, I kept replaying the last 2 years in my mind. Every family dinner, every Sunday phone call, every reassuring smile, every time Ethan had looked me in the eye and asked, "How are you holding up, Uncle Dan?" I wasn't just grieving the money. I was grieving the person I thought he was. When I finally pulled into my driveway that afternoon, the farmhouse looked exactly the same. The porch swing Margaret loved. The flower bed she'd planted. The kitchen light I'd forgotten to turn off before leaving. Everything was unchanged. Except me. My first instinct was to call Ethan, to demand answers, to drive straight to his apartment and force him to explain everything. But I didn't. 38 years as an engineer had taught me something important. Emotion solves nothing. Evidence solves everything. So instead of picking up the phone, I sat at the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and started building a file. For the next 4 days, I barely slept. Rachel emailed me every bank statement, transfer record, wire receipt, and account summary she could find. I printed everything, page after page, transaction after transaction. Every withdrawal had a date. Every transfer had a destination. Every missing dollar left a trail. I created spreadsheets, highlighted suspicious payments, compared dates, cross-checked account activity. Slowly, a pattern emerged. This wasn't impulsive. This wasn't a mistake. This was planned, carefully, patiently. Over 14 months, Ethan had moved money in small amounts at first, then larger ones. By the time I noticed, he'd become bolder, much bolder. I opened his social media accounts. What I found made my stomach turn. Photos of expensive dinners, weekend trips, designer watches, a luxury SUV parked in front of a downtown hotel. Captions about success, about hard work, about living your best life. I matched the dates of his posts to the withdrawals from my accounts. The timeline fit perfectly. The weekend he posted pictures from a beach resort. A large transfer had been made 2 days earlier. The photo of his new SUV. That same week, another withdrawal appeared. Each picture felt like another betrayal. Not because of the money, because he knew exactly where it came from. And he smiled for camera anyway. On the 4th evening, I called someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Victor Hayes, an attorney who had once represented my engineering firm during a difficult contract dispute. Victor had a reputation for staying calm under pressure. He answered on the second ring. "Daniel, it's been a long time." "It has." Something in my voice made him serious immediately. "What's wrong?" I told him everything. Margaret's death, the banking issues, the account access, the missing money, the luxury purchases, the transfers, the silence on my end after Rachel's phone call. When I finished, Victor didn't speak for several seconds. Finally, he asked one question. "Have you confronted him?" "No." "Good." I wasn't expecting that answer. "Good." I repeated. "Daniel, the The moment he knows you discovered this, everything changes. What do you mean? Money disappears. Assets get transferred. Stories get rehearsed. Evidence vanishes. He paused. Right now, he thinks you're still grieving, still trusting, and still unaware. I looked down at the mountain of paperwork spread across my kitchen table. What should I do? Victor's voice stayed calm. You do exactly what you've been doing. Document everything. Tell no one. Not your sister. Not mutual friends. No social media. And whatever happens, do not call Ethan. For a long moment, I stared at the photo of Margaret hanging on the wall across from me. I wanted answers. I wanted justice. Most of all, I wanted my wife back, so I could ask her what to do. But she wasn't there. So I took a deep breath and listened to the next best thing. Evidence. Before we continue, tell me in the comments, if someone you trusted betrayed you, would you confront them immediately or gather proof first? And if you're enjoying this story, subscribe for more powerful family stories like this. Victor spoke again. Tomorrow morning, I'm bringing in someone who specializes in tracing money. Once she finishes her work, we'll know exactly where every dollar went. I thought I was prepared for whatever we'd find. I wasn't, because the truth was far worse than stolen money. Ethan hadn't just spent my retirement savings. He'd used it to build the life Margaret and I had dreamed about for decades. The next morning, I drove to Victor Hayes' office carrying a cardboard box filled with bank statements, printed emails, and handwritten notes. By then, I hadn't slept properly in almost a week. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan sitting at my kitchen table, smiling at me while quietly draining the accounts Margaret and I had spent decades building. Victor introduced me to Rachel Monroe, a forensic accountant with nearly 30 years of experience tracking financial crimes. She didn't waste time. She opened her laptop, adjusted her glasses, and looked directly at me. Mr. Harper, I need you prepare yourself, she said. People who do this rarely steal for survival. They steal for a lifestyle. I nodded. I thought I was ready. I wasn't. For the next 10 days, Rachel followed every transfer, every payment, and every withdrawal Ethan had made. She traced the money through multiple accounts, payment apps, and online transactions. When she finally called me back to Victor's office, she placed a thick report on the conference table. This is where your money went. I took a deep breath and opened the file. The first pages were bad enough. Luxury hotels, fine dining, designer clothing stores, expensive electronics. Then it got worse. A luxury SUV, a diamond engagement ring, private boat rentals, weekend trips. But none of that compared to what came next. Rachel slid a photograph across the table. It showed a beautiful cottage overlooking a quiet lake, wooden dock, stone fireplace, small fishing boat tied to the pier. The kind of place Margaret and I had dreamed about owning after retirement. What's this? I asked quietly. Rachel looked at me with sympathy. He bought it 6 months ago. The room suddenly felt smaller. How much? $215,000. I stared at the photo. Margaret and I had talked about buying a place exactly like that for years. We spent decades saving carefully, skipping vacations, driving older cars, putting money aside one paycheck at a time. We always told ourselves we'd buy our dream home someday. Someday never came, but Ethan got his someday. With our money, Victor leaned forward. Daniel, this wasn't an accident. I know this wasn't poor judgment. I know this was a plan. I looked down at the report again. Every transaction was organized by date. Every purchase matched the timeline of my missing money. The evidence was overwhelming. Then Rachel turned to another page. There's more. She explained that Ethan hadn't just taken money from my accounts. He'd also used altered financial documents to secure a personal loan. Documents created using information from my investment accounts. My name had been removed. His had been added. The signatures had been edited. The balances changed. I looked at Victor. What does that mean? For the first time since we'd met, I saw a hint of satisfaction in his expression. It means this isn't just theft anymore. What is it? Federal bank fraud. The words hung in the air. Federal, not civil court. Not a family disagreement. Not a private matter. A crime. A serious one. Victor explained that if Ethan had simply taken money as an authorized account holder, recovering it would be difficult. But forged documents changed everything. Electronic applications, false statements, fraudulent loans. Those crossed state lines and involved federally regulated institutions. That meant federal investigators. That meant real consequences. I sat back in my chair and rubbed my hands together. For days, I've been wondering if confronting Ethan was the right thing to do. Part of me still remembered the little boy who loved science kits and birthday magic tricks. The boy Margaret treated like her own son. But the man he'd become was someone else entirely. Victor looked me directly in the eye. You have two choices. You can call him today and hope he apologizes, or you can let professionals handle it. What would you do? I asked. He didn't hesitate. I let the evidence speak. Before we continue, tell me in the comments, do you believe families should be forgiven no matter what, or are some betrayals impossible to overlook? And if you're enjoying this story, subscribe for more real-life family stories with powerful lessons. I looked one last time at the photograph of the lake house. Margaret should have been sitting on that dock. She should have been drinking coffee on that porch. She should have had the retirement we'd worked so hard to build. Instead, Ethan had stolen it. And suddenly, my decision became very clear. I looked at Victor and said 5 words I never imagined I'd say about my own nephew. Let's do this the right way. Once I gave Victor permission to move forward, everything changed. But on the surface, nothing looked different. I still drank my coffee every morning on the porch. I still walked to the mailbox every afternoon. I still answered my sister Linda's calls and told her I was doing fine. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Victor and Rachel were building a case. Bank records, transfer histories, loan applications, account statements, social media posts. Every piece of evidence pointed in the same direction. Ethan hadn't made a mistake. He'd made a series of choices, carefully planned choices. A few weeks later, Victor called me. His voice was calm, but there was a seriousness to it. It's happening tomorrow morning. I knew exactly what he meant. Federal investigators had everything they needed. I barely slept that night, not because I doubted my decision, because I knew what would come next. At 6:15 the following morning, agents arrived at Ethan's apartment with a search warrant. They seized his laptop, his phones, financial records, and electronic devices. He wasn't arrested that day, but he was officially notified that he was under investigation for fraud, identity theft, and financial crimes. I spent that entire day at home, quietly waiting. The phone didn't ring. Not once. By evening, I wondered if he'd figured out who was behind it. Maybe he was talking to lawyers. Maybe he was trying to come up with another explanation. Maybe, for the first time in his life, he was realizing that charm couldn't fix everything. I went to bed around midnight, but I couldn't sleep. At exactly 2:02 a.m., my phone lit up, Ethan calling. I stared at the screen for a moment. Then I let it ring. Once, twice, 3 times. Only then did I answer. Before I could say a word, I heard him crying. Real crying. The kind that comes when someone realizes they're losing control. "Uncle Dan, please?" His breathing was uneven. They came to my apartment. I stayed silent. The FBI took my computer. They took my phone. They're asking questions about my bank accounts. He paused, struggling to catch his breath. "What did you do to me?" I picked up the glass of water beside my bed and took a slow sip. Then I answered. I found out the truth. Silence. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then his voice changed. The panic faded. The excuses began. "Uncle, listen to me. This isn't what it looks like. There's an explanation. I was going to pay you back. You don't understand." I interrupted him. "No, Ethan, you don't understand." Another long silence. I could almost hear him trying to think of the right words, the right story, the version of himself he wanted me to believe. But that version no longer existed. "Do you remember your 7th birthday?" I asked quietly. He stopped crying. "What?" "Your father couldn't make it. So I drove 4 hours to be there. I wore a ridiculous cowboy hat and perform magic tricks because your mother said you were excited about the party. He didn't answer. I bought you that chemistry set you wanted. I stayed until everyone left because I didn't want you to feel disappointed. Do you remember that? His voice cracked. Uncle, please. When your Aunt Margaret got sick, you sat beside me in the hospital. When she died, you promised you'd help me. You looked me in the eye and said I could trust you. I took a deep breath. And while I was grieving her, you were emptying my accounts. He started crying again. This time, I didn't stop him. You used her savings to buy yourself a new life. The lake house, the SUV, the vacations, the engagement ring. You sat at my kitchen table every Sunday and lied to me. I was going to tell you eventually, he whispered. Those words hurt more than anything else. Not because they were true, because he actually believed they made things better. I closed my eyes. When I spoke again, my voice stayed calm. The same voice I'd use in hundreds of engineering meetings. Steady, controlled, certain. Do you know what engineers do when they find a crack in a bridge? He didn't answer. We don't paint over it. We don't pretend it isn't there. We inspect it. We document it. And we call the people whose job it is to fix it. His breathing became heavier. They're going to send me to prison. That's possible, I said. Please, Uncle Dan, you can stop this. Tell them you don't want to press charges. It's family. For a moment, I looked at the framed photo of Margaret sitting on the nightstand beside my bed. Then I answered, it stopped being a family matter when you decided to steal from family. Before we continue, tell me in the comments, if someone betrayed your trust this deeply, could you ever forgive them? And if stories like this resonate with you, subscribe for more powerful family stories. His voice dropped to a whisper. I've ruined my life. No, Ethan, I said quietly. You made your choices. And now those choices have consequences. I ended the call. Then I sat alone in the darkness, listening to the silence. For the first time since Margaret died, I didn't feel helpless. But I didn't feel victorious either. Because no matter what happened next, one thing was certain. The boy I once loved like a son was gone. And the man who replaced him would soon have to answer for everything he'd done. 6 weeks after that phone call, the indictment became official. Federal bank fraud, wire fraud, identity theft, multiple financial crimes. Ethan accepted a plea agreement before the case ever reached trial. According to Victor, most people in his position do. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, transfer histories, digital applications, forged financial documents. Every transaction left a trail, and every trail led back to him. The federal government froze his accounts. The luxury SUV was seized. The engagement ring was seized. The lake house was seized. Everything he'd built with stolen money was taken back. Justice, I learned, isn't dramatic. It's paperwork. It's signatures. It's patience. Months passed before the final sentencing hearing. I sat quietly in the courtroom, hands folded in my lap, while Ethan stood before the judge. For the first time in years, he looked exactly his age. Not confident, not charming, just tired. He glanced at me once. I couldn't read his expression. Regret? Maybe. Fear? Or perhaps he was still trying to understand how everything had fallen apart. When the judge asked if he wanted to make a statement, Ethan stood up slowly. He apologized to court. He apologized to his mother. Then he turned toward me. I'm sorry, Uncle Dan. I listened, but I said nothing, because apologies matter most before the damage is done, not after. The judge sentenced him to several years in federal prison and ordered full restitution. Every paycheck he earns in the future, every tax refund, every dollar subject to federal collection rules. A portion will go toward repaying what he stole. Victor called it accountability. I called it consequences. My sister Linda didn't speak to me for over a year. She believed I'd chosen money over family. I understood her anger. If our positions had been reversed, maybe I would have felt the same way. So I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I simply gave her time. The following Christmas, I mailed her a card. No explanations. No excuses. Just 3 words. I love you. She didn't reply. The next year, I sent another. A week later, I received a letter in return. Inside, she wrote only one sentence. I've read the court records. I'm sorry. We're still rebuilding our relationship. Slowly, carefully, like repairing a bridge after a storm. Some things never return to the way they were, but they can still become something strong. A year after the sentencing, I bought a small home near a lake. Not the dream house Margaret and I once imagined. Nothing fancy, just a quiet place with a screened porch and a walking trail down to the water. Every morning, I drink coffee outside and watch the sun rise over the trees. I adopted a rescue dog named Bailey. She sleeps at my feet while I read the books Margaret used to love. Life isn't what I planned, but it's still good. Every few months, a small restitution payment arrives in the mail. Sometimes it's $20, sometimes $50. Once, it was less than $15. The amount doesn't matter. I don't keep those checks for the money. I keep them as reminders. Reminders that actions have consequences. Reminders that trust should be earned, not blindly given. And reminders that love doesn't require you to accept betrayal. The money I recover will eventually be donated to a charity that helps elderly people who have been financially abused by family members. Margaret would have wanted that. People often ask me the same question. Do you regret turning him in? The answer is simple. No, because protecting someone from the consequences of their actions isn't love. It's permission. For years, everyone around Ethan ignored the warning signs. We made excuses. We painted over the cracks. I did it too, until one day, the structure failed. If I've learned anything from a lifetime of building bridges, it's this: small cracks never stay small. Ignore them long enough, and eventually, everything collapses. Before we finish, tell me in the comments, what's one lesson the story taught you? And if stories about family, trust, and resilience mean something to you, subscribe and join our community. As for me, I still think about Ethan sometimes. Not with anger. Not anymore. Anger takes too much energy. Instead, I think about choices. How small decisions become habits. How habits become character. And how character shapes every future we build. The last bridge I ever built wasn't made of steel or concrete. It was built the night I chose evidence over emotion, patience over revenge, truth over silence. And if you're carrying your own burden today, remember this. You don't have to shout. You don't have to fight. You just have to stop pretending the cracks aren't there. Because healing doesn't begin when problems disappear.